What's up, everybody? Charlie Marlow here. That's Eric Messersmith. The first ever, the inaugural episode of Everybody Settle Down, the brand new podcast talking news and politics. Everybody Settle Down, Eric. That was your title. So I give you all the credit for that. This is going to be a crazy year. I think we both agree in news and politics with the election. And we said, hey, we got to jump on and try to talk about this because I feel like it's going to be what everybody's talking about in the world for the next 11 months or so.
Oh, yeah. This has the potential. You never know. Maybe it'll be normal in just like 2012 or 2008 or 2004. But I have a feeling that this is going to be one of those years where historians, look back on, they'll be talking about 2024 in 40 or 50 years from now.
Yeah, it's funny because you said maybe it's going to be normal. I actually weirdly want it to be normal, but then not so much for the podcast, I guess. I have to be honest that sometimes all the craziness is better for us talking, but don't you think Americans crave some normalcy? Hasn't it been too crazy since about 2015 or so? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, I think it's been a gradual thing. And then I think it was one of those things that happened very gradually and then all of a sudden. And that's kind of how we've gotten to this moment. And I think you're right. The all of a sudden part started 2015, 2016, and just kind of accelerated from there. But I think you're right. Look, I think what has happened in politics, like big picture over the last, I've been following politics pretty closely for, God, I'm old now, probably almost 30 years, about
How
30
old are
years.
you, by the way?
I am 44. I turned
Okay.
45 next year. And I got into politics hardcore really in 94. And I was in high school. That's when I really started getting into it and like it to a nerd level. And I've kind of kept that level of intensity pretty much for 3 decades since then. So I think what's happened in that time is that the extremes of both parties have gotten more powerful for a variety of reasons that we can talk about later. They've gotten more organized, more powerful, and they've gotten larger. They're not a majority, I don't think, certainly of the whole electorate, maybe not even within each party, but they have gained the power more and more and more. And I think that margin on each side, or that if you were kind of slicing up the electorate, I would say it's maybe, I don't know, 15% total of the electorate on the right and maybe another 15% on the left. And they really are running shit more and more. And then the 70% of people that's left kind of has to pick a team, one or the other, or goes back and forth between the team, or there's still a large number of people that don't even care. And they will show up on election day, maybe, or maybe they won't. And, they're doing their own thing and they're not even interested and engaged in politics. So that's kind of how I see the state of kind of the broad 30,000 foot big picture view of politics in 2024.
Yeah, it's funny. Whatever that number you mentioned, if it's 15% on each side or 10%, I don't know what the exact number is, but I try not to be naive. And I think because you and I both work in the media, and we'll get to our backgrounds at the end, but sports media and news media and radio shows and TV shows, you're always constantly in a newsroom or talking about media or on Twitter, which I think is all about just media people talking to each other. And so when it feels like America is more divided than ever, and I hear that all the time, and I hear people say that all the time, and I think sometimes you kind of buy into it. But then I try to judge it more based on my everyday life. And I don't know, maybe it's a bubble, but just interacting with people, everyday life, going to stores. I have kids at school, soccer teams, this and that. I don't feel it's nearly as divided as we talk about, or if you're watching cable news or partisan news or social media, which just amplifies all of the crap. So I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a positive person, but I actually think truly we're way less divided than it appears from the media standpoint.
Oh, I think that's definitely true. I think that social media has a huge influence on that. Look, most people, they have jobs and they have hobbies and they play video games and their kids have soccer practice and then maybe they're planning a vacation. That's what they care about. They don't care that much. Again, I'm talking about the vast majority of people. They care little or in some cases not at all about politics. And I think when we analyze elections, that's a big part of analyzing elections too, is on January 10th, unless you are in Iowa or New Hampshire, most people aren't thinking that hard about the primaries or even the general election. They have a general opinion about Biden or Trump, sure, because these people have been in the media forever. We know them so well in terms of their policies, their personalities. They're two. I mean, heading into a general election, typically you do not have two candidates who are both as well known and have firm opinions formed about them as Trump and Biden. But people aren't really focused on the details because, of course, they're not. Why would they be? They're living their lives. And you're right. People who are in the media or follow it closely I think, have a totally distorted view of the average citizen's opinion about politics.
I think it's funny what you just said too about everybody's focused on themselves, but also because Biden and Trump are such known commodities, and let's be real, they're both old. They're both either 80 or pushing 80. We know so much about them. So I always find it interesting, like how many people, if it's Trump and Biden, which I think we both think it's probably going to be, although there's some wild card potential, but how many people would really switch their vote right now, right? Like, I don't know. I know the economy, and you could say, okay, maybe this will happen with the economy, maybe something will happen in foreign policy, but really, like from switching to Trump or Biden, I understand maybe not voting, like having the enthusiasm to vote, and maybe Biden, I'm not going to vote, or Trump, I'm not going to vote, or I will vote, but you know what I'm saying? Like we know both these dudes. They've been in the public eye for 40 years. Like at this point, does it even matter what each of them do? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it matters both a lot and not at all. And the reason I say that is because you could put up literally any two candidates, right? Pretty much anybody you can imagine in the Republican field right now, or anybody you could imagine as a replacement for Biden. And you could insert those names in. And I think no matter what you did, the election would still be in a range of about here. We focus so much on Trump and Biden because they're the two leading candidates. But if you look at polling with DeSantis versus Biden, you look at polling with Haley. Haley's doing a little bit better than Trump, but that's because I think she's not as well known. And same thing on the Democratic side. If you took out Biden's actually polling better than Kamala Harris against Trump, but not by a lot. Same thing with Gavin Newsom. And so my point is we focus so much on Biden and Trump, but really they're just stand-ins for our modern two parties because we break roughly. Right now, we're in a period of very close partisan politics. It's been that way, really. You go back to 2000. Ever since 2000, elections have generally been very close at the presidential level, with the exception of 2008 when Obama, blew out McCain. But that was really because the economy had completely tanked. That's deceiving. That was a close race in August. Obama and McCain were close. And then you had the financial meltdown with the housing market, and Obama went on to a pretty easy win. But short of that, these elections have been pretty close for a while now because the country's fairly evenly divided. But the reason it matters a lot is there are a lot of people that switch back and forth, or I shouldn't say a lot, enough to swing the difference. There are voters who voted for Obama in 2012 and then voted for Trump in 2016. And then some of them went back and voted for Biden in 2020 because they thought Trump swung too far. So that's why I say it matters a lot, because it might be a small percentage of the electorate, but it's the difference. In this period we live in where things are really close, those voters that can swing back and forth, or like the people you talked about, maybe they'll vote, maybe they won't. They are going to decide this election, and they're really going to decide it in like 5 states. Those people that we're talking about in Wisconsin and Michigan and Georgia and Nevada and Arizona, they will determine who the next president is.
And I give those people a lot of credit. I'm being dead serious because I don't know if I'm built that way, right? I mean, you kind of come up, you have your own value system and whatnot. Now, I think I'm pretty much a moderate. Now I'm a Democrat, and I always have been, but I think I'm pretty center. I also think, now I said this the other day on the radio, that I've gotten more conservative, but as I've thought about it, this is kind of the Bill Maher answer, but I think it's more so that the Democrats have gotten more left. I don't really think I've changed that much. I'm a dude from Ohio. Democrats in Ohio, I mean, unions and public schools and healthcare. It's not crazy stuff, right? It's not crazy stuff. So I don't know, those voters that actually do ping pong back and forth from an Obama to a Trump or a Biden, I give folks like that a lot of credit because those are the people that are determining these elections. There's a lot of people who they're going with the team no matter what. And that's the
Right.
biggest problem is like I think nowadays it is so team first that we can't even, in my opinion, call out obvious wrongs. Just obvious wrongs. If it's
Yep.
my team, it's okay. You give them the benefit of the doubt. If it's the other team, you attack. You're hypocritical about it. That's what I hate the most about our politics these days.
Yeah, that I would say is the number one phenomenon I have seen since I've been following politics is it has evolved into more like what the background you and I have is sports. It has become like fandom, right? It's not just, oh, I think the Republicans have superior policies or the Democrats have. It is a little bit about that, but it's mostly about this is my team, this is my tribe, these are my people. And so I will defend the most indefensible shit if my team does it. And I will never give any benefit of the doubt to the other side, no matter what it is. And it leads to there's example after example of this, of just the blatant hypocrisy, really, of both parties over the last couple decades, where the same thing will happen basically. And if it's their guy or girl, they will defend them. And then as soon as it switches and it's the other team's guy or girl, they will rip them apart. And I try personally to fight against that because we all have our biases and we all have things that we're naturally drawn to or against. But what I try to do is I try to be like, okay, let's just set a fair standard and then try to apply that standard to anybody, whether they're on our team or not. But the problem is, and I think this is where social media comes in with algorithms, which aren't just on social media, by the way. Mainstream media is using algorithms too. You don't think the New York Times has great data on who their online subscribers are? You don't think cable news has great data on who's watching and minute by minute and what topic they're interested in? Of course they do. And that's only going to get more and more, that's only going to get better and better with AI. And so what's happening is people are, whether they acknowledge it or not, are fed a diet of looking at the world from one prism. And sometimes that's all they see. And I try to watch mainstream media and, alternate media and try to, dabble in both. And sometimes it's like if you watch one and then watch the other, you would think you're in a different reality because some issues won't even be addressed by one outlet that were like the prominent issue on the other. Or if they are addressed on both, the slant is so severe that I could see how you would have a totally different worldview than if you watch something else. And that's different. That's not how it used to be. It used to be everybody watched CBS, NBC, ABC. Everyone saw Walter Cronkite every night. And so whether that was good or bad, everyone kind of had their news filtered through that prism. Now, I think there's advantages to the way we do it now. And what you and I are doing is a great example of that, is literally anyone can get their message out and have their opinion heard. And in a lot of ways, that's a really cool thing. But when you combine that with the algorithm, that is where it can get dangerous. And I think the algorithm of social media and other media companies is what has led to what I talked about earlier, which is the 10, 15, 20% of each party, the extreme, which has always been there, they now consolidate more and more power because of technology and the algorithm.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the natural inclination is to think that this is being done for the political agenda, which I think is part of it, but I'm a big follow the money guy. To me, almost everything in the world and in politics, there's a couple issues that people actually feel strongly about that has nothing to do with money, some social issues. But I think I think most of this it comes down to money. And that's why I think the media, the for-profit media, what they're doing is they're monetizing the divide, they're monetizing the anger. And I'll be the first one to tell you. So like I've basically done YouTube now for going on 3 years. I read all about it, I get in the analytics and all that. And I'm telling you, negative does better. Negative does better. Even if it's a title, for example, or a shocking thumbnail. Like this video that you and I do, hopefully a lot of people watch here on YouTube and podcasts. But the way I title it, the more negative or shocking that I title it, the more people. I've done this. I put a video out, title's bland, nobody clicks on it. All of a sudden, I change the title, make it a little more spicier, make it more negative, and people are clicking on it. And I just think these news agencies are monetizing our anger. They're doing it on purpose. And then what you said about I'll watch one station, the other station. It's a different reality. It's a different world. And I don't think that now some of these stations or channels lie. They do, but it's by omission, right?
Yes, exactly. It's
the
slant.
It's the stories they cover and the stories they don't cover. For example, if you were to go left-wing news, their top 7 stories might be accurate, but they're ignoring 7 others. And then the other side is doing the other 7, but they're ignoring the other one. So it's not like when we say fake news, a lot of that stuff is truthful, but it's more about the focus. The focus is very much agenda driven.
Absolutely. And if you want to be well informed, you have to consume media from all kinds of different vantage points. You have to, because if not, the algorithm and what you said, the negative reinforcement of how media is incentivized and promoted will just lead you into a bubble. You will be in a silo, and that's why you won't even be able to have a conversation with someone who's in the opposite silo, because you'll just be talking past each other about things that you may not have any idea what they're talking about, and they might not have any idea what you're talking about. I think for-profit media has always been around from the history of this country, and media has always done this. I mean, that's actually how media used to function for most of American history. You go back to like the 19th century, literally papers were called Republican and Democrat in a lot of cities. They were competing. They were trying to appeal to a certain audience. So partisan media is not new. What is new is the algorithms and the technology and that advancement of how to be able to do that. And if you want to see an example of that, all you have to do is go to X, formerly known as Twitter, and just go back and forth between the For You tab and what's the other one called? The following.
Yeah.
And following is just your timeline, everyone you follow in chronological order. For You is their AI algorithm. And you can see the difference right there. And that, in a nutshell, is what is happening with media. Now, look, I'm not saying that is all bad. Again, I think it's great that we have independent media. I think it's great we have a lot of voices. There's an upside to that, too. I'm not here to say it's all doom and gloom and terrible. And I certainly do not want the government to come in and censor media and have state-controlled media. I think this is a better alternative than that. But it's not perfect, and it has a huge negative downside, and we should just be honest about that and try to find ways to combat that are practical, that don't involve the government coming in and saying, this is what you can say, this is what you can't.
Yeah, and you mentioned Twitter. A lot of people talk about this with TikTok. I used to be on it. I wasn't really. I'm not on it now. I think I put a couple videos like maybe a year ago, but it's the TikTokification of America, which is TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, or X, where you're just this is what we're doing. This is how we're consuming, just like this. And I'm guilty of this, by the way. And I have a radio show, but we've all done this, some more so than others. But like back in the day, I mean, I used to deliver the newspaper. Okay, I used to watch local TV. I worked in local TV. I work in local radio. Now I'm doing more of the digital stuff. But like I used to consume traditional media. And now we'll be on the radio and, hey, did you see that article? I read the headline. I didn't really read it, right? or memes. I mean, think about how powerful memes and GIFs are, honest to God, because not everybody, but everybody gets to vote. And there are people who vote who read everything and watch everything. And there are people who read nothing. And honestly, their news or their political news might come from memes. I think sometimes we don't realize how powerful a funny political meme or a GIF, that's the thing that everybody puts in their group text. That's the thing that gets 1 million views and likes on all these social media. And they're funny. And I think sometimes that takes 5 seconds. You look, you laugh. Oh, Biden fell down. Oh, Trump said something stupid. Like that's how a huge percentage of this country consumes politics.
Yeah. I mean, the Israeli-Palestinian thing was a great example with the stories that came out about how many young people are getting all or most of their news about world events like that conflict from TikTok. And look, that is scary. It is scary. I think, but look, it's not just about saying, "Oh, this is awful." Like, I think we need to talk about like how can we make it better again without having the government come in and go too far in regulating speech, because I do not want that. I am a free speech guy. I
Me either.
believe that
Yeah.
we should err on the side of free speech. I don't want. I'm look. I think conservatives have a point when they talk about what the government did. It wasn't just the Biden administration, it was the Trump administration before it. But what the government did to try to suppress speech on social media in and around the COVID time period, but with other things as well. I think why is the FBI spending so much time on that? Uh, I think that's a legitimate question, right? And I think Elon Musk has a point. And if you read the Twitter files, some of that stuff, some of it was overblown, but some of it was disturbing. I don't want the heavy hand of government in our speech. But I also think that just sitting back and letting everything go without any kind of regulation at all is also crazy. And so life and how we regulate this area shouldn't be about like absolutism. Like either it's the Wild West and anything goes, or government has to come in and be censoring everything. Like those are not the only options. And I'll give you a good example. I think in Europe right now, I think it's in Ireland, what they have proposed, and this is the best reform I've heard for social media. What they have proposed is let people have to opt in for their kids on the algorithms. So if someone, a child, a minor signs up, because look, this does destroy these social media companies and their algorithms destroy a lot of lives, but I think it's particularly so with kids. And studies
Mhm.
have come out with suicide rates and depression and all this stuff. There's numerous things that have come out in recent years to back that up. But the answer to me is not to say, well, TikTok can't exist. The answer is to say, maybe these algorithms are so powerful that we should protect kids from them, and parents should have to opt in for their kids to get the algorithm, because as you talked about, using these social media sites with and without the algorithm is a completely different experience. And I would say without the algorithm, it's a much healthier experience. You're less likely to be led down the rabbit hole of craziness and conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism and racism and all the other awful stuff that is there.
Yeah, and the fact it's two media guys and 20 minutes in, we're still talking about the media here. We are going to get to all the candidates and all that, but because you brought up that last point, I'm sure you've read the stuff about TikTok, which you see how in China they get a different version, right?
Yep.
They get a different version of TikTok. It's more education based. I can't remember exactly the amount of time. I think it's a 40-minute or whatever the limit is. Somebody can look that up and fact check me, but it's something like they get an educational driven version of TikTok, and the kids can only use it for a certain period of time of day, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever it is. And then in the United States, we get a totally different version that they're just shoving all of the crap and all of the nonsense and all of the divisiveness literally into the brains of our kids at a 5 second, every 5 seconds, a new one.
Yeah, absolutely. We again, we have to do something about it, but I don't want to see us go too far with kind of outright bans or kind of overt government censorship of what people can see, because that is not the way, especially in America. More speech is better, and not less. Not certainly not the government coming in to restrict it.
Okay, so easy question now. We'll pivot from the media stuff a little bit here. Just big picture. Take it any way you want. Take it any direction. What do you think's going to happen? What do you think's going to happen in 2024?
Well, look, I'll start small. Let's start with Iowa, because Iowa's coming up Monday the 15th, at the first primary or caucus of the year. I think Trump's going to win. I mean, I don't think that's a big surprise. But the thing to watch, I think, is how big is his margin? Does he get over 50%? Does he get an outright majority? And then the other thing to watch is who finishes second, because DeSantis has poured everything essentially into Iowa. He's got the endorsement of the Republican governor, the leading evangelical figure in the state. He's visited all 99 counties. I mean, he has basically bagged everything on Iowa, and he's far behind Trump. And in some polls recently, we'll get more coming up over the weekend, Nikki Haley's actually very close to him for second. If Haley beats him and finishes second, and DeSantis is third in Iowa, I just don't see how DeSantis can go on. Like, he's polling terribly in New Hampshire, low single digits. He's not really polling well anywhere else. I'm sure the money's going to dry up if he has a disappointing finish. So I think if DeSantis is third, or even if he barely beats Haley but is way behind Trump, I just don't see the rationale for him continuing. I think he gets out. And then the other thing to watch is, does Haley do well enough to ride momentum into New Hampshire, where if you look at the recent polling, she really has a chance to win, and that could reset the race.
So I think it's interesting for this first one for us to talk maybe more about DeSantis and Vivek potentially and Nikki Haley, because I have a feeling, and I think you agree with me, that we're going to be talking about Trump and Biden for the whole rest of the year.
Yes.
So because you brought up DeSantis, I think it's just a really interesting question of what happened to him. Because for a while there, when you think he's going to be the nominee, or he's polling 50-50 with Trump, a year or so ago, whenever it was, he's riding the wave of being the best governor during COVID. You didn't have the red wave in the 2022 midterm. So I think Republicans said, whoa, we can't back Trump. We got to go to DeSantis. I think everybody assumed he'd maybe be the nominee. I'm watching this dude as he's campaigning, though, and I've watched him on a couple podcasts and all that. And I have nothing against Ron DeSantis. He seems like a great governor. I think he would be a good president. To me, he doesn't do well running for president. He does, all the different stereotypes I think are true. He seems robotic. He doesn't seem comfortable giving his answers, the facial things, this, can I smile, do this?
Oh, that smile.
And this is a small thing, but
it matters.
It does. Okay, but I was watching him on the Patrick Bet-David podcast, which I watch all the time. I really enjoy that podcast. And he finally came on, and Patrick Bet-David was asking him, what kind of music do you listen to? And he said something about country. And maybe I'm focusing too much on this. I was talking to my wife about this, but I just couldn't believe his answer. He said something about, hey, what kind of music do you listen to? He said, oh, some country, some blah, blah. And then he goes, some country riffs and tracks. And I said, no human being has ever said that. That was like an AI generated response.
Right.
Now, maybe I'm looking too much into that, but I just go, that is somebody who's not comfortable or not authentic. He doesn't know how to sit down and have a beer and just shoot the breeze. And that's what people like, I think, in these interviews and podcasts. They want to see you be a human, or maybe swear, or just be real. And to me, Ron DeSantis is a great guy and a great governor, probably would be a good president, but he's just like not comfortable in his own skin.
No, I think that's a great point, and it sums up kind of where his campaign went wrong. I think, look, let me give him the benefit of the doubt by saying a couple things. First of all, even if he was an outgoing, gregarious guy and he ran a perfect campaign, I still don't know if there's a universe where he beats Trump, because Trump has such a hold on the base of the Republican Party that I don't know that DeSantis had really ever had a chance. That's number one. Number two, I think there were some other factors that hurt him. And I think the way that Trump has been rebuilt, and the way that January 6th and his post-election conduct has been downplayed and explained away by the large part of the conservative media, which gave kind of that benefit of the doubt of, well, it wasn't really that bad. That really hurt DeSantis too, because Trump was toxic after January 6th. To the point where I think a lot of Republicans who didn't vote to impeach him in the Senate didn't, because they thought he was done anyway. They thought, this guy's not coming back from this. Well, fast forward a few years later, and here we are. And so when DeSantis first got in, he was polling close to Trump nationally and in a lot of states. I actually thought he had a really good chance to win the nomination. In fact, I said, if I could get the betting odds, whatever they were at that point, I would have bet on DeSantis. Not because I thought he was most likely to win, because I thought with good odds, I would have taken DeSantis. And I think part of that is I just misjudged the hold of the Trump over the base of the party. Part of it is what you pointed out. I underestimated how bad DeSantis's personality was. I really did, because he was just so robotic. And the thing is, running for president is different than being president, no question. But a lot of it, you're right, comes down to, do I like this guy? Could I have a beer with this guy? That's what George W. Bush, say what you will about him, did so well with. Is you felt like, you know what, I could sit down and bullshit with this guy and have a beer and we'd have a good time. And to some extent, Trump has that too, that kind of man. he'd say what you will about him. It'd be interesting to have a conversation with him. I know he doesn't drink, Obama too, to some degree had that. And I just think DeSantis either doesn't have it, it's just not him, or he does have it, but he feels like he has to suppress that in order to just give the right answer and all. And I think he suffers from this too, this paralysis of he seems to always be calculating what he needs to say. And that is one of his biggest problems too, is he didn't just come out and go right after Trump right away for the obvious things that I will say now he and Haley are going after Trump for, but it's too late by this point for him, certainly, maybe for Haley. These arguments are the arguments he should have been making right away, but he was trying to walk that fine line of, well, I don't want to piss off the Trump base and I want to be critical, but not too critical. And I think that is really what sunk him, combined with his just stunning lack of personality.
Yeah, and that's where if you ask me, where do you think Trump is weakest? To me, it is January 6th because I think most people, if you're not super partisan, can admit Trump was a pretty good president. Things were pretty good. Look, did he handle COVID perfectly? No, but also COVID wasn't his fault. I understand people saying things felt better when Donald Trump was the president. But a lot of people also watched January 6th and were horrified by it. And that's something that we saw with our own eyes. It's hard to tell people you didn't see something that you saw. So to me, that would be Trump's greatest weakness because his presidency was pretty dang good and the economy was good and all that. And the reason I bring this up is it seems like those other Republican candidates are afraid to go there.
Yes.
That's where he's weakest, but they won't hit him there.
Well, and part of the reason they're afraid, though, and if you follow right-wing media, you know this very well, is the rehabilitation, which I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So January 6th, what you just said, that was the consensus opinion pretty much across the political spectrum. Not just January 6th, by the way, because I think people get so focused on that day, but Trump's conduct leading up to it, after the election, fake electors, pressuring Mike Pence, trying to overturn the election, throwing out, ridiculous conspiracy theories about votes being stolen. All of that made him so toxic to pretty much everybody. But what happened was slowly the image was rehabilitated and doubt was thrown in and things were downplayed. And so that is what has allowed Trump to get past that to the extent that he has. But you're right, that's within the Republican Party. To the broader electorate, that's still a problem. And you don't have to go back very far than 2022 when the hardcore candidates who supported Trump and denied the election mostly lost. Kerry Lake in Arizona is a good example. Those candidates didn't fare well in 2022, even though it should have been a really good Republican year with Biden's first off-year election when historically the president's party just gets crushed. They didn't. And I would say the reason they didn't, despite Biden's problems, is because of that issue. So you're right. That issue is still alive in the broader electorate, but not so much in the Republican Party. I think the angle, real quick, for DeSantis should have been from the beginning. No matter what you think of his conduct and no matter what you think of January 6th and his various, legal problems, this guy is chaos. He is chaos. He's going to not be on the campaign trail this summer. He's going to be in a courtroom fighting to stay out of prison. That's what everybody's going to be talking about. His money is not going to be going all to ads. It's going to be going to his legal defense team. And Biden or whoever the Democratic nominee is going to pummel him with that over and over and over again. So you may think that he did everything perfectly great. You may think that he is the best candidate. You may have liked his economic policies, but he is not going to be the best candidate because he's going to be in a courtroom half the days between now and the election, not on the campaign trail, and chaos and controversy just follow him everywhere. And I hear Haley and DeSantis making those arguments now, but again, we're late in the game. Opinions have been locked in to a large extent, and people have kind of made up their mind.
That's what I find fascinating about the Republican side is they're kind of going against Trump, but they're not because they don't want to lose the Trump base if they want to run again in 2028. That's my thing with Vivek, for example. I like a lot of things about Vivek, some things not so much, but if I'm him, he doesn't really go after Trump. And if I'm him, it's like he's not trying to really win. I think he's trying to set himself up for 2028, and maybe that's the smartest thing he can do. But if I'm him, my message is I'm half the age of Trump. I don't have the baggage of Trump. Oh, by the way, I could get 2 terms. That's another thing we're not thinking about with Trump, or maybe not talking about enough. He'll be a 1-term guy if he wins. If I'm Vivek, I'm saying I'm everything you love about Trump, but not any of the bad stuff. But it seems like all of these, there's just such a tiptoe. There's a tiptoe of wanting to win, but not just destroying your future in the Republican Party by pissing off that huge, whatever, that 35% for Trump that never leaves him no matter what, that will never leave him.
That's right. And that's the incentive they're responding to. I mean, I think it's clear as day. They are trying to hit Trump without alienating his voters. And that is a very, especially DeSantis, because DeSantis knows, like polling has shown, that DeSantis is the second choice of a lot of Republicans. Like he does very well when you say, okay, who is your second choice? And the reason is because the Trump people like DeSantis. They think he was a good governor. They think he implemented a lot of the policies that Trump has talked about, and they like him. But they like Trump more. And so DeSantis had that really fine line to walk of how do I get these people who already kind of like me, but like Trump just a little bit more? How do I get them on my side without, pissing off Trump? And it's really, really hard. And we see that. And that's why he's probably going to be out of the race next week.
What do you think of Nikki Haley? When I'm watching her, and again, the reason I tell people I'm a Democrat is just because I think sometimes it frames how you think about certain things. And again, who you offer the benefit of the doubt. And when I'm watching these debates, to me, Nikki Haley is the most normal and reasonable candidate, or maybe she's running the most centrist campaign. Her campaign to me almost feels like a general election campaign as opposed to a Republican primary campaign. So I understand why a lot of hardcore Republicans don't love her. I think more Democrats and moderates are like, hey, Nikki Haley, she's not too bad at all. But then I don't know. I can also see how people on the right, or let's say young people who don't care that much, I could see how this whole idea of neocons, I could see how people are like, is she that much different than Hillary Clinton? Right? She's not a Democrat. She's got the R, but just in the way she thinks and talks and focuses, like, is there that much of a difference between, let's say, Hillary Clinton and Nikki Haley? I can understand the argument from the right of she's kind of a rhino, or she talks like it or feels like a rhino a little bit.
Yeah, look, she's a good example of kind of the prism you view things through, because she could be any of those things that you just mentioned, depending on kind of where you come from. But if you really, because style plays such a big part of it, and I think her style, the way she talks, the way she frames issues, look at how she talks about abortion. She's not pro-choice. She's pretty pro-life. In fact, I don't know that there's much difference between her position on abortion than Donald Trump's, but the way she talks about it seems more moderate. And I think that appeals to some people, but that also really pisses off some people, and especially on the right. I If you go down the list and you look at policy issues between Trump and Haley, to the extent that Trump lays out policy issues, there's not really much difference. Like on taxes, on government spending, on the border, abortion, gun control, I think their positions are very, very close on pretty much all of those things. The one thing you could maybe point to, which I think would be fair, would be how they would handle the war in Ukraine, eh, where Haley wants to keep funding Ukraine. Trump says he will negotiate a deal between Ukraine and Russia on day one, but doesn't really say what he would do in terms of funding. So that that's one issue where you could say they're different. But outside of that, I don't know. But I'll tell you, the Trump people despise Haley, and you see that on social media. They despise her, even though, again, when it comes to policy, there's not a lot of difference between her or DeSantis or Trump. But you're right. She has managed to appeal to some moderate voters, but it has come at the price, I think, of that kind of hardcore base of the party that is just dead set against her. I mean, Tucker Carlson said the other day, if Trump picked Haley as his vice president, he would not support that ticket, even though we know, he loves Trump. So that gives you kind of insight on how Trump is perceived among what I would call the hardcore base of the modern Republican Party.
So we've talked a lot about the candidates, and we'll get to Biden, and we're going to have shows every week, so we'll have a ton of time to talk about all this. But right now, what do you think? What issues, not just the personalities of Biden or Trump, but what issues you think matter for 2024 and will really potentially swing the votes, because it's the James Carville line, it's the economy stupid. But then look, if you go back to 2022 and not just opinions, but exit polling, obviously Roe v. Wade and the January 6th at that time had a lot of legs. And there were some bad candidates that prevented that red wave that everybody thought would happen. But I guess just general question, what do you, whether it's economy, inflation, anything, foreign policy, Ukraine, what issues do you think will really matter in 2024?
I think this is one of those rare elections where issues are not going to be the dominant thing, right? It's going to be because what we talked about before, the
Yeah.
division, how well known these two men who are most likely the nominees are, and already the opinions one way or the other that people have of them. It's going to be a lot about personality. And then you throw in Biden's age, Trump's legal troubles, Hunter Biden. There's just so many other sideshow things that I think issues will be less important than they normally are. But to the extent they are important, I think by far the number one thing is the economy, because it's always the economy, but in particular this year, inflation. And that is what really is hurting Biden. And one of the big reasons is approval ratings in the high 30s or lower 40s. Inflation, look, Biden can say, and it's accurate, that inflation has come way down since its peak in the summer of 2022. We're back to the point now where we're basically near 2%, which is what the Fed wants. The Fed's probably going to start cutting interest rates next year because inflation's improved so much. So Biden can tout that. On the other hand, if you just look at where prices were in 2021 when he took over and where they are now, they're roughly 20% higher. So your grocery bill is roughly 20% higher. And inflation is one of those things. It's other than maybe a war that isn't going well. It's the worst thing a president can have because people feel it. No matter how much money you make, you feel it. No matter where you live. We all get gas every week. We all drive past gas pumps. We all go to the grocery store. Everybody sees it all the time. And people look at that and they say, yeah, and the prices might not be going up much anymore, but they've already gone up 20%. And so inflation to me will be the number one issue. Beyond that, I think it probably will be abortion because the Democrats are going to make this election to the extent they can about abortion. You saw that was a huge factor in the midterms in 2022. And so I think that will be a big issue as well.
So
Also immigration. I have to say, of
yeah,
course, if you look, the immigration thing, that is not just some right-wing concoction. It is
no, it's
it
not.
is a disaster right now.
It
We had
is.
over 300,000 people in December come across the border illegally, the most we've ever had in any month. I mean, it is an absolute disaster. And maybe they'll work out a deal here. They're negotiating in the House and Senate and the White House to try to work out a deal that would institute some reforms at the border, the asylum process. Maybe that will help improve those numbers between now and election day. But if not, that is a major issue with Biden because you don't have to be some right winger to say it's probably not a great idea that hundreds of thousands of people come across our border every month and then are just released into the United States with a court date for 2030. Like, I mean, you don't have to be a MAGA guy to think maybe we should do something about that. Maybe that's not the best way to run an immigration system.
And it's impacting some of these liberal cities, New York and Chicago, and they're feeling it. They're seeing it and feeling it. I have buddies in Chicago who are talking about all different things with some of the migrants and where they're housing them up there and all that. So, and we'll get back to that, but because you brought up inflation, and you're right, inflation punches you in the face every day, 5 times at the gas pump, at the grocery store, and all that. And go back to the 70s. So obviously Nixon had his own problems, but you go from Nixon to Ford to Carter, nobody survived that inflation. Nobody. And then Reagan in his second year gets in check, but you had inflation, I think, from about 1973 to 1980, whatever it was. And it was change, change, change. Obviously Nixon resigned, but that's where, so I agree with you. I think, inflation's terrible for Joe Biden. Now, to make the argument, oh, okay, there was spending in 2020 and spending in 2021 for COVID, like people don't want to hear that, right? I get that. They don't want to hear like the academic argument
Right.
about that right there. But I actually think weirdly, and maybe it's a tie, but I think Biden's age is the number one thing going against him. His age and how he's appearing and carrying himself. And the only reason I say that is, and I'm just trying to make the argument here. in theory, okay, the economy could get better. This could get better. Maybe whatever's going on in Ukraine and in Israel could be solved. Biden can't get younger. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like, really, let's be real about this. It goes back to, don't tell me I'm not seeing what I'm seeing, right?
Right.
Like,
No, you're
come
right.
on, man. He stumbles, he's falling down, he's squinting. It's a bad look. The optics are terrible. So again, inflation, economy, huge problem. But in theory, that could improve. Any other of these policy issues, in theory, could get better for Joe Biden. Nothing about his age and his acuity is going to get better.
No, you're right. The trend line is important for those other things, right? It's not just the absolute level of inflation
Yeah.
or immigration today, as we sit here in 2020, early 2024. It's what's it like in the spring and the summer and the fall. And if everything is getting better, then that will help Biden. But you're right. The age is going to go the opposite way, right? So what does he do? Well, I think one thing you do is you make it a choice, because if it's a referendum on Biden, he's probably going to lose. That's why his approval rating is 39 or 40%. People see his age, they see the other issues we talked about, and they're like, I'm not totally satisfied. Someone else, please. But eventually, that someone else, please, which is what you're seeing right now, that goes away. And at the end of the day, most people aren't going to be voting for RFK Jr. They're just not. They're not going to be voting for Jill Stein or Cornel West or whoever the libertarian candidate is. They are going to vote for either Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Like 95% of people. I'd be shocked if RFK, he's polling right now at 9-10%. That's not going to last. At the end of the day, RFK Jr. will be lucky to get 5%. Almost everybody that shows up next November, votes by mail, is going to vote for either Biden or Trump. They're going to make a choice. And that's what Biden has to do, is he has to say, look, you may not love me. Yes, I'm old. But by the way, the other guy's only 3 years younger than me, right? But I'm better than him for a myriad of reasons. And he has an argument there. He certainly has things he could point to. And that is what Biden and his campaign have to do. They have to frame it as, it's not whether you love me or not. It's, am I better than the other guy? That's the only thing that matters. And that's the message Biden has to, get through in his campaign this year. But also it could help him to get out there. And yes, Biden, when he was younger, made gaffes. I mean, look, it's not just in his old age that he has said dumb things. He's done that throughout his career. But at the end of the day, to some extent, you got to let Biden be Biden. And is he going to have a flop here or there? Sure. But hiding him away, I just don't think is the best way to counteract it. You got to be strategic about it. You don't want him out there doing, 5 events a day or anything crazy like that. But an occasional interview with an outlet that is maybe not MSNBC or NPR would be nice. Occasional press conference. Let the man be out there and talk about his accomplishments. And here's the thing. People have this expectations matter. So our expectations of Biden at 80 and 81 right now are not particularly high. We don't expect him to go out there and be like, the second coming of Barack Obama in terms of his stump speech. Nobody expects that. Our
Eric,
expectations are reasonably low. So if he's fine, he will exceed those expectations.
that's the thing. I think his expectations are so low that when he goes out and says 3 sentences together,
Right.
people are surprised about it. Don't you think?
I do. And I think that has helped him tremendously. Like in 2020, everyone said, well, he's running the basement campaign because he doesn't go out much. COVID was raging at that point. So he had a legitimate defense, but also it was true that he did not go out and campaign a lot. But when he needed to show up at the Democratic convention, he was fine. In the debates against Trump, he was fine. And I think people looked at that and they said, you know what? He's okay. Like, yeah, is he as sharp at that time? He was what? Is he as sharp in his late 70s as he was when he was 55? Of course not. Nobody is. But again, that is where you go back to making it the comparison, which is what he and his campaign have to pound over and over again. It's not about, do you love Joe Biden? It's about, am I better than the other guy? And if he can prove that he's at least, like, if he goes out and gives a good convention speech in August, if he does end up debating Trump and he holds his own like he did in 2020, that's a win for him, because Trump's argument is this guy can't do it. He cannot do it. He can't debate me. He can't give a speech. That's essentially Trump's argument. A lot of people believe he's like totally lost it, right? So when State of the Union was a great example. He did a great job at the State of the
Yes.
Union. Republicans started heckling him. He went back and forth.
Yeah.
Now, look, was that anything outstanding? No, right? But grading on the curve of what people expect for Biden, you're like, this guy's fine. He's got it together enough.
Why do you think? I wonder why he's still running. And the reason I ask that, maybe I'm naive, but when he ran in 2020, he was the team guy. Think about this. In 2016, every other VP basically is a shoe-in to get the nomination, right? Barack Obama's pretty popular. Joe Biden's younger than. He basically didn't he stepped aside for Hillary Clinton for the good of the Democrat Party. Then he comes back in 2020 and nobody knows who they want to vote for. And it was kind of like, all right, we'll vote for Joe. He has the best chance to beat Trump. I remember Joe Biden even said this. I'm just kind of like I'm going to pass the torch to the next group, whoever that was, Kamala, Pete. I don't even know who he's talking about. I actually believed him when he said that. Okay, I'll do 4 years. You're going to be old. But now, like, he accomplished, in my opinion, what he was supposed to accomplish if you're on his side.
Yes.
He beat Trump. Now you're super old. You're clearly losing it. You've become like this guy who's everybody's making fun of. I wonder why he's still running. Is it ego? Is it his family? Because look, I know Kamala Harris isn't popular, but I would think almost any other Democrat at this point, am I wrong, has a better chance of beating Trump just because of Biden's age. I think I know people don't like Gavin Newsom. I get it. I know his record isn't great, but it's more so just the dude who looks like a 55-year-old, who looks like he should be a president, who can run and have some energy. And Biden is not that. I wonder why he hasn't just said, okay, I did my 4 years. I'm going to pass the torch. I'm going to move on. Because don't you think it's better for the Democrat Party if somebody else runs? I do.
I think the answer to that is it's not clear, and I think that's why he's running. I think, look, and a lot of this is Kamala Harris. She has been such an abject failure as a politician that it puts Biden in a position where even if he did, I think he wants to run. Like, it's cool being president when you've been in public service your whole life. Like, he's been at this for 50 years. He ran in the 80s. He ran in 2008. He wanted to run, I think, in 2016, but Obama talked him out of it and they went with Hillary. Like, he has wanted to be president his entire adult life and worked toward it, and now he is. And as you mentioned, if you look at accomplishments, he had a pretty productive first term. Now, you may disagree with the policies, but he got a lot of things through, way more than you would expect from a Senate that was 50-50 and a bare majority that he had in the House. He was effective at passing legislation, and now he gets to do that for another 4 years. So I think he wants to run. He wants to keep being president and accomplish more things because he's done it his whole life. But even if he didn't, is he going to turn it over to Kamala? She polls pretty much every poll I've ever seen. She does worse against Donald Trump than he does. So the lack of an heir apparent as the number two, other than him just wanting to be president, I think is the answer to your question. And also, like Gavin Newsom, I live in California. I live in the LA area. That's where I'm coming from with you right now from. He has the baggage of supporting Obama's policies to the extent that they're unpopular, and the baggage of what's going on in California, which isn't all roses, right? I mean, nobody's attacking Biden for crime in San Francisco for the most part. They would be if it were Gavin Newsom. Nobody's attacking Biden for the homelessness in LA County. They would be if it's Gavin Newsom. And so Newsom would have his own baggage of not just all the baggage Biden has, but all the baggage that he has as the governor of California. So it's not clear that he would. And then who else? Mayor Pete? I mean, Amy Klobuchar? I mean, you're getting into kind of second, third, fourth tier people. So I think it's a combination of, I think Biden really likes being president and wants to keep doing it. And there is nobody else waiting in the wings where there's data you can point to say, oh yeah, this is the person.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to our media conversation at the beginning too. You mentioned some of the legislation where I think it's fair to say, hey, look, there's a reason Joe Biden was in the Senate for freaking half his life. He knows how to work the Senate.
He does.
But that's not sexy, right? The CHIPS Act. People aren't talking about the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. that budget they passed, he clearly will give and take, and has allowed these folks to compromise. And okay, Ukraine money for us, you get the defense. Hey, we make a deal, but you can't run on that, right? Like that's not, you and I will talk about that. The CHIPS Act is super important so we
It
can make
is.
these conductors so China doesn't run that show. But it's hard to run on that when people are just like can point to the gas price.
That's true. I mean, look, if you objectively look at it, the infrastructure bill, which by the way, Trump touted for a long time, I'll get infrastructure done, I'll make the deal. Didn't happen in his 4 years, half of which he had a Republican Congress. Biden gets it done almost right away. The CHIPS Act, which you pointed out, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is by far the single biggest effort our government has ever made to combat climate change. They're all three of them, the thing they have in common is they're 10-year bills. The money for all of those things, many of which pull incredibly well. I mean, we're talking about replacing lead pipes, building roads and bridges, airports, building up a domestic infrastructure for chips, mining critical materials for batteries in the US, which we really haven't done before. Now we're going to start doing that. Solar factories, all of this stuff that is being built all over the country, it's going to happen over a 10-year period, right? So Biden goes to these factories, he tries, but it's not top of mind for people. And the reason it's not is because we have gotten into a society where, like I talked about earlier, issues matter, but they only matter to an extent. And what matters more is Trump's legal troubles, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's age, politics, the back and forth. That is what matters more. That is what gets clicks. No, very few people are like, oh, tell me more about the Chips and Science Act. I'd really like to learn about all the great things for our domestic microchip industry. There's like 2 people that think that, right? Most people don't give a shit.
Right. And even though the facts though, or what I perceive and what I try to read about, why do we have inflation? And this is where I think Trump is in a great spot from a political angle. Because if you really do your homework, most people know, okay, COVID, nobody's blaming Trump or Biden for COVID, but the federal government went buck wild in 2020 under Trump and in
Yes.
2021 under Biden. They both did it. And then the inflation. So, okay, 2 years of ridiculous printing money. And now we've had 2 years of inflation, 2022, 2023. It looks like it's going to seep into 2024. Hopefully it continues to dissipate, but who knows? But it's like a credit card. If I fill up my balance, but if I have a no interest credit card for 24 months and I load it up for the 24 months and then the bill comes and the interest comes 24 months later, it's like Trump is able, even though I think it's fair to say Trump and Biden both helped create the inflation with the printing of money in 20 and 21, but the people didn't feel it. The people
Right.
didn't feel the inflation until 2022. And it's very easy to say that's Biden's fault. And it's
Right.
like it's making that argument. I have to do a 5-minute dissertation where you can just go, no, my gas is more now. Biden's the president. My groceries are more now. Biden's the president. It's just easy to put it on him.
There is a nuanced argument that Biden can make. Part of it you just made. The other part of it is inflation in the last few years was not a US problem. It
Right.
was worldwide. Not every government did what we did in 2020 and 2021 to the extent we did it by the massive inflow of money to people, which we needed to do. I'm glad we did it, right? Tens of millions of people were out of work. We needed a lot of that. Did we need to go quite as far as we did with the $600 extra unemployment for a year and a half? Probably not. We probably went a little too far, but we erred on the side of, hey, we have a once in a century pandemic. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying. Businesses are closed. Schools are closed. Let's help people out. But around the world, inflation went up. Pretty much every developed country. And if you go look at the inflation rates of the last few years, even with some countries still today that are dealing with way higher inflation than we have, we actually did okay when you look at it on a worldwide basis. What happened was the supply chains got destroyed and everything costs more for a while. And that happened worldwide. So certainly I think the money that we approved to fight COVID contributed to it. But what shows you that it wasn't just that is what happened in the rest of the world. So that's a nuanced case Biden can make. And he can also say, look, it has come way, way down, which is also true. And he can say, by the time, if things keep going the way they are, inflation actually won't be a major issue anymore. And we've improved it dramatically, and we've done it without a recession. Most economists, if you go back to 2023, 2022, they predicted we would have a recession in 2023. I mean, there was article after article after article that we will have a recession because we're jacking up interest rates so high. And it didn't happen. Now, maybe it still will. Who the hell knows, right? I mean, anything could happen in the economy. But so far, inflation has come way down without massive unemployment. In fact, our unemployment rate has been under 4% now longer than it's been since the 1960s. So this is the argument Biden can make. But as you point out, the problem is it takes more than a 30-second soundbite. And people are still like, yeah, but my grocery bill is 20% higher than it was 3 years ago, which is true. And so it's a tough argument to make. You really have to invest time and energy to make it.
Yeah, and that's why I just don't think it's a winning argument. And I'm laughing as you were saying that. I'm laughing because we've had so many political discussions on my radio show this year, and I try to make these arguments. Now, I say this with love. You and I are nerds in the sense that we kind of like this stuff. We like looking this stuff up. But if somebody goes, "Hey, my grocery bill's super high," and then you say, "Yeah, but if you lived in Europe, it'd be 12% higher." They don't care about that.
Right.
By the way, same thing with oil. No one knows, it's not being broadcast, that we're producing more oil than we've ever produced in the history of this country. Why
Yep.
is that? Because Democrats don't want to brag about it because it'll piss off the climate change people, and Republicans won't mention it because then they can't blame Joe Biden for high gas prices. So again, when you have, hey, I'm paying $3 a gallon, and I go, we're actually producing more oil than we've ever produced. Nobody cares about that until their gas is $2 again. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't want to, and that's what I'm saying. They don't want to hear these nuanced arguments. That's why it's easy for Donald Trump to just point to Biden or just say, "Hey, weren't things better when I was president?" A lot of people go, "Yeah, they were."
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm giving Biden a lot of advice here for free. They in terms of how to run the campaign. But another thing he needs to do, and he can do it because he doesn't face any serious primary opposition. So he doesn't have to worry about winning a primary. He and his team should be focused on the general election. They can make the pivot that a lot of presidential candidates make when you look toward the middle. And for instance, you mentioned the energy thing's a great example. He should be out touting right now, yes, I believe in climate change and I've passed the best, the biggest bill in history to try to combat it. On the other hand, we need oil right now. And guess who produced the most oil in the history of the country? Guess whose administration that happened under, right? But you're right. He doesn't talk about it because he doesn't want to piss off his base. And immigration is the biggest issue where this plays, because Biden could, and I think will eventually, I think you will see a deal in the next few weeks that will really crack down on the ridiculous asylum process we have now at the border. And it will piss off the immigration activists on the left, and they will be vocal and they will attack the administration. But Biden has to do that because that is how you win presidential elections, with those people we talked about at the beginning, whatever it is, that 10 or 15% of the electorate that can be persuaded. If you seem like you're reasonable and you are willing to look your base in the face and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm just not with you on this. I've got to do what I think is best, and you can be mad at me. That will help Biden, because where are those people going to go? Like the hardcore immigration activists, are they going to vote for Trump? You know what I'm saying? Like, he needs to be focused on, how do I do common sense things that 10 or 15% in the middle that's going to decide this election will say, you know what? I may not love Biden. Yeah, he's old. He's not what he used to be, but that makes sense to me. Like, at least he's willing to buck his party's base.
Yeah, I think, and we'll wrap up here because we're at about an hour. This is the first podcast here. Everybody settled down, and this just kind of went whichever way it's going to go each week. I think immigration is a Democrats. Now, when I say worst issue, you can say, okay, inflation, Biden's age, but just from a standpoint of, you mentioned some of the hardcore immigration activists, but I think most reasonable people are just like, what's going on? What are we doing here? Right? I mean, again, the majority of people are saying this doesn't make any sense. And I don't want to gloss over this. I think maybe next week we should focus a bunch of the podcast or the next time we do it on immigration. I don't want to go too long here. This was fun, man. This was good stuff for the first Everybody Settle Down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we got a little fired up, but in general, it's good if everybody does settle down when we talk about these things. I think that my prediction for Iowa, by the way, is that DeSantis does finish second, but barely, and Haley has the momentum, and DeSantis drops out. So I think that's where we will be. And Trump, of course, wins pretty easily. That's, I think, where we will be next week when we do this show.
And I should have brought this up. This is where I can never actually end a show. I keep talking, but I just think our whole primary system to me makes no sense. Like Vivek, and again, I watch probably more Vivek podcasts just because he does them all and he's interesting, even if you don't agree with everything he says. But the other day, the announcement came out. He did the double Grassley. He went to every county twice, and I'm thinking, is that so? You're telling me the person who runs for president, you should want them to go to every county in Iowa 2 times?
That's crazy.
Does that make any sense at all?
None at all. You're right. It's a ridiculous system. And maybe next time we can get into that.
Yeah. All right. So that's the next episode. Everybody settle down. Eric, good stuff. Comment, like, subscribe. This is the first show. We're going to put it on podcast. It's here on YouTube. If you like it, share the show, share the video, share the channel. Let's get word of mouth. Tell your friends, put it in your group text and all that. Eric, good stuff, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun. Can't wait to do the next one.
All right. See you next week, everybody.